let me know if you've got any sound, whether you can hear that coming through. Check 1, 2. Check 1, 2. Testing, testing. 1, 2, 3. Just wait for the lead.
Right, everybody, we'll call the meeting to order. Ngā mihi nui kia koutou katoa, no mai haere mai ki tēnei hui. Welcome, everyone. Good to be back around the table, and I'll call for apologies. Lateness for Malcolm Lyle, who is not a member, but we will note his apology. If there being no more, can I get the mover? For that one, we won't actually require a mover, actually. Sorry, right, as he's not a member of the committee. Conflicts of interest?
None. Excuse me, Mr. Chair, none.
Thank you. Matters under investigation. There's 3 items on our matters for investigation, 2 of which will be reported on today, and the other one's due on the 1st of July. So we will deal with those in the course of the meeting.
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
I wonder if there is an item of urgent general business. I'm not sure whether it belongs to this committee or full council, so I'll raise it here first. The recent decision by NZTA to close the state highways in the advent of snow, I believe, should be of concern to council, because whilst the operation of the highways is their business, it isolates some of our communities in that event. So I'm wondering whether we have a discussion at this meeting or at full council of the implications of that recent decision.
Thanks, Mark. Yeah, it is of intense interest at present. I think because we've got council meeting immediately following this afternoon, I'll defer it to that meeting, if you're comfortable with that. Right, minutes of previous meeting held via Zoom. Can I get a mover in a second for the minutes? Sam and Shane. Anything arising out of those minutes? If not, it moved and seconded. All in favour? Against? Carried. Thank you. Witness Chair report. Belatedly, I have done it. Pretty much it's a welcome back to be in chambers again, which is absolutely fantastic. Whilst we only had 1 meeting via Zoom, I found it particularly difficult to chair that. It's hard work, and congratulations, Sam, for you chairing the ones that you have done. You tend to have your brain in about 5 places at once. I won't read this out as it's written, you've all got copies, but obviously the main focus of council at the moment is our annual plan, and that will continue on tomorrow and possibly Friday. With deliberations to come to an outcome. The challenge for this subcommittee, I guess, will then be to ensure that those targets and goals are met, and we'll have the ability to monitor those going forward. Also, we'll have some discussion around the role of the independent, the appointment of the independent member going forward, and that's a process that's underway now. But of particular note, the Chief Executive tells me that the calibre and number of those are particularly pleasing, and I think that's a reflection on the stead that this council has held in the wider governance community. So that being said, I'll move the adoption of the written chair's report. Thank you. All in favour? Right. Yeah, absolutely, Dave. Chief Executive's report.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'll just take questions rather than speak more specifically to some of the issues. As I note, the audit interim visit commences next week, and we will also have Julian Tan. I'm just looking to you, Craig or Greg. Julian's at the next meeting, is that correct? Yep. Of interest, the annual report, we are revaluing some of our significant assets on the balance sheet this time around, so it'll be interesting just to see what the downturn of the COVID-19, or the impact of COVID-19, should I say, may have had on some of those. I would expect very little at this stage, but nonetheless it'll be good to have current numbers associated with those, particularly as we go through the investment report that I'll be bringing back to this committee within the next couple of months, Mr. Chair. Special reserves booklets are attached and you will have had the opportunity to read through those, so you may have some questions on proposed courses of action. The independent subcommittee member, reiterating the chair's comments, very, very pleasing calibre of applicants that we had for that position, just so that you know the time frame going forward. The review committee, which is the Mayor, Councillor Reid, Mr Bell and myself, will be meeting during the course of this day to determine the interview list. Interviews will be held next week, and we will be bringing a recommendation for the independent member to join this committee through the council meeting of the 24th of June. And I would expect that person to be sitting at the next meeting of the committee. And for information, Mr Chair, items 5 and 6, just around the SOI for Orion and the strategic intentions from the Office of the Auditor General going forward. For interest, the committee might like to know that Canterbury councils are again forming a working party to look at long-term planning, and that will include representatives from each council, all of the audit directors, and also a representative from Office of the Auditor General, so that we're working in sync, we're not duplicating, and we're collaborating as best we possibly can. And finally, Mr Chair, we have on Monday of this week advertised Greg's role. It's going out under the heading of organisational performance. It's just a rename that we've done internally, but the key focuses, and I'm reading from the job application, it says formerly corporate services function, organisational performance is a diverse portfolio, including financial planning and management, technology, information management, treasury, and revenue. And it goes on and talks about digital vision as well. So, happy to answer any questions, Mr Chair.
Thank you, David. What I suggest, maybe we'll go through just item by item, 1 through to 6. So I'll call for any questions, clarification around the interim audit visit and report, if there's anything there. If not, I mean, it's a work in progress. I'm assuming that if there were any questions, David, or any issues, you would have brought them to our attention.
Well, the issues will come out of the visit rather than going into the visit.
Yes, yeah. Annual report, any questions there? Item 2. Special reserves booklet. What I would like to do there is perhaps just go around each of the members of the committee as we've got a representation of the wards, and get any comments from you on those as pertains to you. You've had a chance to feed, we've all had a chance to feed back on those. So Councillor Reid, beginning with you, are there any comments you wish to make around that? Councillor Mugford? None? Councillor Epiha? Councillor Hassan?
This came up with regards to the Ellesmere Reserve funds. I was accessing those funds in regards to a speed sign for Springston. And what happened was I had to make inquiries through the Reserves Committee, because one of the projects that the corporate had down was actually agreed to by assets that it was already sitting on the books, and they would bring it forward. It was a set of cricket nets. So that project got brought forward. But I just felt that there could have been a little bit more clearer communication between assets and corporate with regards to you know, some of the funding and where the funding sits within these accounts. I can only highlight that one because that's the one that I came across, and I do realise and understand the difficulties that we've just had in the last 6 weeks. And previous to that, reserves were actually working not exactly in the office, so it wasn't a matter of just going next door or down the hallway. So do appreciate that, but it may be an issue that could come up with some of the other funds.
Thank you, Deborah. I guess we're looking at the nature of the funds rather than the operation of them to some degree, although the operation of them, I've made some note here myself that looking through them, some of them have been inactive for some period of time, or that they tend to be, in some cases, I won't mention which funds, but that their income and expenditure don't match, so they're an accumulating funds in those. So I think a wider discussion around that at some point, perhaps not now, is needed, but the ease of application, am I reading you correctly there, Deborah? You're looking at the ease of applying or gaining funds out of these areas. Is that where you?
Yes, and I think if you've got any of you that are on committee structure, think about whether for investment spending, capital project, executive priority, or maintenance project. Or it also will have capital project maintenance as well as maintenance. So the union council that may have some funds in here that need to be spent. Please look at prioritising capital first, maintenance, bringing forward maintenance or maintenance. So you need to be seen, because what happens is these funds will go next year.
Thank you, Deborah. Any comments, David, you want to make on that before I move to the next question?
Well, picking up Deborah's comments, I mean, there's two aspects of this. The first one is around creating awareness of the funds and the opportunities to spend them, which Deborah's alluded to. And the second one is the governance of those funds, and probably more so for the newer members of the committee to just remind them that those funds are there, opportunities are there to spend them, particularly when we get through the rating discussions that we often have, and we tend to forego opportunities as a result of lack of funding, whereas in fact funds are available.
Bob, you had a comment?
Yeah, just a question of David on the Westview Fund. Where are we actually with that, and what is going to be the procedure from now on, and when?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the matter is progressing through the Melbourne Community Board. So by way of background, there is a fund of $1.3 million that we're talking about. There was a committee formed in 2013 through 2014. Terms of reference were prepared, continued escalation of that fund for use in projects within the Darfield Township. I expressed some concern through the board that we need better governance structure, more formal reporting, given the size of the fund. At our last Melbourne Community Board meeting, we reviewed the terms of reference. Following discussions, I circulated a revised copy of those terms of reference to the board. The next step is that on Thursday of next week, one of the board members is discussing the new terms of reference with the Darfield Township Committee, and the outcomes to that are being reported back to the board meeting on a fortnight's time, and then we will be adopting the formal terms of reference.
Thank you, David. I guess the conversation, I'm looking at a couple of funds in the Ellesmere Ward, and I know the conversation between myself and Councillor Epaha around encouraging those funds to be expended wisely and not to build up an excess of funds. And I think that's something we should communicate to all of those funds, that they're not there as a personal slush fund as such, but they're there to benefit their communities. I think we can't reiterate that often enough. If there's no more discussion on that topic, if we move forward, David, you've already spoken briefly on the independent subcommittee member. I might just make the statement there that I did have a conflict involved, and I haven't been involved in the selection process to date, and it may be that I can re-engage depending on who the people shortlisted are. But if just we go through again the process, and I wonder if Councillor Reid would like to make any comment about the process from governance level.
Thanks, Councillor Lehman. So essentially, we're got down to a short list now, and as you've alluded to, that you had a conflict with one applicant, and so after meeting today, and when we have the short list for where we interview, depending on who the candidates are and whether you have a conflict anymore, then I will step down and you will replace me if there is no conflict, since you are the chair of the Audit and Risk Committee.
Thank you, Nicole. I'm unsure as to whether I still have a conflict or not. So,
and you don't know yet.
No, and I don't know yet. So, at best I don't comment. That's right. Yeah, exactly. Right. Thank you. If there's no more questions around that process,
Actually, just to
yes.
clarify, although you do have a conflict, I'm not aware who that individual is in that selection, and I should have reiterated that in that. So it's quite a clear process that there's no personal interest in that at all.
Yeah, appreciate that. We've been very careful to try and avoid any knowledge of whom that person might have been. So appreciate your input, Nicole. Moving forward, we'll go on to the Orion Limited Statement of Intent for the next 3 years. Are there any questions around that, David, or any comments you want to make specifically about that?
The only comment I would make, Mr. Chair, is that this is a machinery process that we go through. The committee did have a look at the SOI. I think it was 2 meetings ago, and we just simply brought this back for the record of the committee.
Now, just a couple of things I've noted from there is there are some notes, as you would expect, on the on COVID, the extension of completion dates due to the lockdown, obviously. So we'll see some timeframes change there. And it's good to see a recognition of targets for greenhouse emissions as well, and that's possibly opportunities where we can work with Orion as a shareholder to advance that for the benefit of both organisations. And also their commitment to training, which I think is particularly important in light of current events as well. So you'd just like to note that. Moving forward, we go to item 6, and just general comments there around the document put out by the Auditor General. I think it's particularly interesting, and I spoke of it last month about our obligations, and it's a reminder really of our obligations as an Audit and Risk Committee and our role in giving good advice to the greater council and indeed to our community. And I think it was a very well written document, to be honest, and well worth a read and a reread. Interesting also was the comment there, I think page 91, where the comment on independent chairs of Audit and Risk, and their encouragement for local bodies to have an independent chair, to move forward to have an independent chair, which is a discussion that we've had certainly previously, and the move to appoint our independent member is part of that process. So that being said, I think that comes to the end of that presentation, David. There's a recommendation there, 2 recommendations that we received, the monthly manager's report, and recommends to council the acceptance of the special reserve booklet and its proposed courses of action to be completed prior to 30th June 2020. So if there's no further comment there, if I can have a mover for that. Somewhere, Deborah, and a seconder. Yes, Shane. Thank you. All in favour? Against? Carried. Thank you. We now move to the projects accountant, page 105. So if we can have Douglas here, Craig certainly here. I'm not sure if Doug. Mr. Marshall, timing is impeccable. It is Craig's report, but we have Mr. Marshall here for any further questions. Craig, do you want to go up the front, or are you happy sitting where you are? You happy? I'm happy with you sitting where you are.
Cool. Thanks, Mr. Chair. Page 105, start of the report. Because this report on the financials is up until the end of April, we were completely in lockdown during that period, and the projects were all stopped at that point at the end of March. The costs that have gone through the ledger for all the projects only pertains to lockdown costs, and for any professional fees that were incurred, well, because they were able to keep on working, particularly in the projects where they're still in the design phase. So there was very little movement in the major projects for the month of April. So there's we could go through it line by line if you like, but They are all pretty much the same comments. The areas where we should be concerned with is in the risk areas. And I've noted all the way through that we still have delivery problems potentially, although in the case of the swimming pool, the bolts, which special steel bolts which were brought in from Germany have arrived, so that risk is now mitigated. But we do still have problems, and it's better to turn around and say we could still have delivery problems. But a major area of concern which could eventuate is, as in the ongoing aftermath of COVID-19, the potential for subcontractors to actually go into liquidation, and thereby that indirectly affects our costs, because the major contractor for the job would then have to look for alternatives. Now, whether or not there is a shortage of work out there, and they'll be quite happy to work for the contract price, or they'll be putting an additional price, we don't know. But it is a risk going forward that we have to actually take into consideration. We have, because of the COVID shutdown, all contractors have been asked to submit a new works program. They are extending the time, generally between 1 month and 6 weeks. At this stage, that's not a large effect, and because of the early stages of all the projects, the potential for actually pulling that back is still there. So at this stage in this report, I can't say that we will go out 6 weeks, but I'll know more once the projects put their claims in for May. I'll have a lot better idea. Happy to take questions.
Thank you, Craig. It's yeah, it is difficult when it's a snapshot of time in the past, isn't it, to foresee the future. I guess a couple of things I think I asked last time was and it's still identified there, and some of it's been answered, as you said, around the bolts, is we're ensuring, I guess we're in conversation with those contractors to ensure that they're having conversations with their suppliers to get that surety as soon as possible. And I'm sure that's taking place, and I think we got that assurance last time. There's some conversation there around controls in light of COVID issues, and are we vulnerable in the future? And I guess that's a risk to us that should we go out of level 1 and back into levels, God help us, 3 or 4 again, and those risks there. And it's maybe a conversation we'll have later, perhaps with Douglas and PX, around some of the difficulties, perceived difficulties around that. It's obviously commercially sensitive, some of that information, so may ask that there. Just clarification too on the contract at Pines. If we're in the design phase only, why we've potentially incurred some costs there because of COVID? Just a clarification of that, if you don't mind.
The Pines contract, the major part of the cost that's been incurred is deposit for the overseas componentry of the solar drying hall, the sludge mixer. But there has been minimal cost. Because it's in design phase, there was some fee increases during that period.
Thank you. Are there any questions from the committee? Obviously, we've got one there from Councillor Alexander. If there's any, Sam?
Yeah, there's this question around the aquatic centre and the long tail that's there with the things that have moved out. Most of the projects have sort of flatlined through COVID and then managed to pick themselves back up and carry on. And the aquatic centre sort of does that, but the finishing few months is a long flat line. It seems like we almost get there and then we're not quite able to open because of work that needs to be done. Just wonder if you can just provide some explanation around that.
The graph is based on the previous plan, with a little bit of tweaking of what I know at the present time. The maintenance side of it is still impacting on the contract, and whether they were moving in and out of the building because there was no one there, and it'll take at least another month to sort out where actually we are with that program.
We just might pay, since we've got James Richmond here in the meeting, just to talk exactly what's happened in that last few weeks with the 3 pools. You could just report, James, on what's happening in that, on the tile work and what's being completed.
Yeah, thank you. at the moment, all the works have been completed except for one heat pump replacement. So essentially what's happened is all the tiling work to the existing pools, except for the current main pools, being completed. And we've had a filter repair completed on the leisure pool as well. Some flooring's been replaced. We checked some handrails and some of those went earthed. So one of those was re-earthed, and a handrail was also installed into the hydrotherapy pool. So yeah, that was going to probably occur during a shutdown during December, January, and it was really nice to get that out of the way during level 3 and level 2 when the facility wasn't going to be fully utilised anyway. So yeah, largely that work's all complete now. The heat pump, I think, arrives next Monday for install Wednesday and commissioning from Friday.
Whether that will make any change to that tail you've referred to, Your Worship, unsure at this time, but I think we're well ahead of that maintenance work, which is great. But there's just the rejigging that's had to occur with just the time with COVID was still a bit uncertain. But as we progress, we'll get more clarity over it. So.
I guess the other question, Douglas, is of course the work that was being done before lockdown was in ideal weather conditions, and they may now have an impact because we've moved into that. I'm surmising here and putting words in your mouth potentially, but it's altered that schedule, and the disruption from weather is potentially more of an impact.
We all well know we had a magnificent April, May. It's been great to have been working in that period, but the period hasn't been too bad. Yeah, the bit of rain the last few weeks, which always has an impact, as we know. But yeah, I think what Craig's identified at the end of April, totally right to identify as risks. There is, we'll talk in public script about a risk that's become up in the pool in the last week as well, just to give you clarity on that, although it may be resolved this week anyway.
Thank you, Douglas and James. Mark.
Thank you. The first, which isn't really a question, it's just to acknowledge the lead contractor on the Te Ara Atea is not taking a financial claim for the lockdown period. I think we should acknowledge that. Mr. Williams, that's actually a good thing for us in terms of no claim, no additional cost to us. I'd like to publicly acknowledge that. My second question is for those projects who are bringing componentry in from overseas, which was maintenance of the aquatic centre and the Pines, is what exposure to currency risk have we with those components coming from overseas? I know that the New Zealand dollar has tended to dip in the last month or two against overseas currencies. And are we exposed, or is the contractor taking that currency risk?
At this stage, Councillor Alexander, we are still anticipating that the sludge dryer will be delivered on time, and our currency has been purchased out to cover that. We will have to do a rethink on that if we get indications that it's not going to happen, but so far I haven't been advised that we've got a problem.
Thank you. If there are no further questions, we've got a recommendation there that the major projects financial report to 30th April 2020 be received for information. Councillor Mugford moved. We've got a seconder. Mayor Sam. All in favour? Against? Carried. Thank you. We move on. James, it's you again. Page 117, Aquatics Facilities Managers report on corrective and test actions for the 2019-2020 season. A good comprehensive report, James. So if you want to lead us through, perhaps a verbal, we've obviously read it, but it'd be good just to get a summation from yourself verbally.
Yeah, sure.
We go to question.
Just starting off with the with two core pools being Darfield and Southbridge. It was good to get them back through pool safe for another season. So as some members will be aware, the season prior to last was the first time that they'd been through an audit, and it was really good to get them through again. It'd be fair to say we're still bedding in some of that culture around health and safety at those sites, and reporting on incidents and accidents and identifying risks. So that's going really well. Key concerns for us around that audit this year were making sure that our water safety records were really bulletproof. Last year, I think the season prior, I think that the records were really good. It just didn't have a lot of commentary on remedial action that was occurring. Clearly, water quality was also a focus for some of the other pools that we are involved with as well, the committee-run facilities. So just talk you through a bit of the process that we went through. Water quality risk management plans were generated in October last year, and I discussed those with committee members. Leaston and Kalinchi were really involved in that process, and it was really good to have them all on board in terms of getting their ideas. Kalinchi ended up tweaking their opening hours so that their water testing regime was lessened, or the burden on them was lessened, which was really good. In December, we undertook some training with Opus. I think there was 5 members from Leaston, the Leaston Pool Committee, and also 1 person from Kalinchi that attended that pool. And then from there, it was really around conducting spot checks on site. And as you'll see, that there was an incident out at Halkett Pool where the water quality was pretty lacking for nearly a couple of weeks there. I think it'd be fair to say we've probably gone about as far as we can with the training and the committee structure in terms of testing. I think the next step to take, which is mentioned in there, would be around remote water quality testing, if we're to keep those pools on track. So that's noted in the report. Finally, around COVID-19, obviously we sort of escaped relatively unscathed from COVID-19 with these summer pools. They closed the battle, just before lockdown occurred. However, if COVID-19 does come back up, and we went back up to level 2 or level 3, they will be significantly impacted. So I just wanted to put that out there for now. Level 2 pretty much sees only structured swimming occurring. So, things like lane swimming can occur, but leisure swimming where people can intermingle and social distancing can't be guaranteed, can't occur. So that would have a significant impact where on these facilities where the main use of the pools is generally leisure swimming and things like that. I'm sure there'll be some questions, so I'm happy to answer those as they come up.
Thanks, James. As I said in the introduction, it was a very comprehensive report, and it's pleasing to see the improvements in most of those pools and the buy-in that we've got from the community. I guess one question I've got there, thinking back to when the process of there's $1,000 goes to school pools to help support their abilities to open. Are we sure, or do we monitor the fact that they're still meeting those requirements to be able to receive that $1,000, that they're still opening, enabling to open to the public to allow access, or are we perhaps in need of a reassessment of that?
It'd be fair to say we're pretty trusting. They obviously have to sign the grant form to say that they're doing so, and it's either signed by the principal or the head of board of trustees. So yeah, I'd be pretty hopeful that they're doing what they say they're doing, but yeah, there's no guarantee, there's no cross-check from our end.
So that's an annual process that they sign up for. So if they're pulling the wool over their eyes, they're doing it knowingly.
Yeah, and annually, yes.
Debra.
Page 127, Lincoln High School pool. I note that you're having discussions about public being made aware that they can probably use this facility. Is that my understanding? Currently it'd be a key system. Yeah,
there was a request from an elected member to investigate whether that could be sort of used as an overflow pool in the summer where SAC was busy and obviously interest in swimming is high around this area. So we investigated it in terms of could we have that provision for public use, but we'd have to lifeguard the facility obviously. So that's where it kind of came through from. The discussions so far are very early in terms of just checking whether they'd even allow that. So yeah, the two stipulations would be from the high school's point of view is that we'd have to lifeguard the facility, absolutely, and have to put some health and safety processes in place, which we would.
And will we have to pay them a fee or for the use of it? How would that monetary side of it work?
That hasn't been discussed, but I think that would be discussed in the MOU that would be arranged. At this stage, I think they'd be pretty happy as long as we maintain the asset for them over that period. we might be able to put a grant towards them, but we're so early on in the discussions there that that hasn't really been entered into. I would imagine that for a period of say 7 or 8 weeks, if we ran that facility, they'd be looking at probably around $1,000 a week or something like that to go back into their facility. Yeah.
And with regards to the $1,000 that's given to the school pools locally in the Springs ward, most of them are located in the Springs ward. The primary schools still have their pools, and it works on a key system. And while the local community may know about it, most of them are the children that go to school that will utilise it. Was there any discussion from those that $1,000 needed to be increased at all with regards to any discussion?
No, I haven't had any direct discussions with the schools individually around that $1,000, and I think that generally the emails that I've received back when the grant goes out, they're just really happy to receive the $1,000 because they don't really expect it.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Reid.
Thanks for that very comprehensive report, James. So my queries are around the Halkett pool, and so you've given quite comprehensive about communication you've tried to have with them and about the committee, and you recommended that the pool be shut going forward. Now I see you've included correspondence that you sent to the chair, and that was back in January. Have you received any correspondence from them since all of this has happened?
Good question. So the letter worked quite well because we met the next day, and the phone calls and the other correspondence wasn't working. So essentially what happened from that point on is we met and discussed the requirements, made sure that they were really clear on the requirements. They said they were. But it was also really clear that it was a huge training element that needed to be bedded in, which was a little bit frustrating, obviously, since we'd already offered the training in December and they hadn't attended. So because that base knowledge wasn't there, so, just to probably clarify the level of understanding, their excuse was we thought 0.0 on the chlorine reading meant just because it had been like that for 11 days, we thought that was what happened. So we're really starting from a really base level of understanding there. So we did some training with them, and then Marcel, our maintenance man, was going back and checking regularly, daily, if not every couple of days to check that out. But it would be fair to say that I wouldn't have full confidence in the testing that was occurring post that anyway. So it did open the communication lines back up, but we still weren't back where we need to be.
So how does that community or that committee feel about the pool going forward? Are they proactively wanting it to continue to be open, or are they ambivalent about what happens?
Yeah, if I was completely honest, I have some real concerns around how much access the some members of the community get. I don't know how. I've asked, obviously, in the report for a count of how many keys there are out in the community, and I don't get that number back. So I can't give you a real answer as to what the community would think. Probably the best way forward would be obviously to meet with the committee and ask them those questions. I don't know how much open access is actually provided and how easy it is to obtain a key to that pool.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Alexander.
Thank you. Excuse me. Councillor Reid's actually asked the questions I was going to ask regarding Halkett. My other point, Mr. Chair, is with respect to the resolution that accompanies this report. The second part should probably be recommends to council rather than endorses.
Thank you, Mark. I'm reading that as endorses to go through to council. If I could seek clarification from the Chief Executive.
That's the correct interpretation, Mr. Chair. Yep.
Perhaps we'll just get that added in, endorse the recommendation. Well, word it better than I just have, endorse that goes through to council for approval. Councillor Eckhart.
Sure, Mr. Chair. Thank you, James, for your report. Page 128, 4.8, Darfield feasibility study. Will you be looking to run more feasibility studies on more pools throughout the district?
Yeah, so probably some of the delay around the Darfield feasibility study is it's kind of forced us to have a district-wide look at the network of pools. So, you know, I suppose we could say we could do feasibility studies on each particular pool and say this is how it's going to roll. But yeah, I think the Darfield work has sort of forced us to take a step back and take a higher level view over what pools are core assets to us and should be sustained long term, and which ones, when they get to a point where lots of money has to be spent on them, you know, tougher decisions should be made. So yeah, essentially that's kind of that Darfield feasibility report is sort of informing a district-wide look at aquatic facilities. Yeah.
Sam?
Yep, just around the Halkett pool, this would be a recommendation that you said will go through to council. What are the options for the community? As this is a final decision closed, you've had your final warning. Is this this is a shot that says unless there's major change that you can show to us, it will be closed. From your point of view, James, is there any coming back from where the community's at? Is this pool necessary for that community, and what would they need to do between now and this report coming to council to show that they are able to successfully and safely run the pool next summer?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think some of the considerations I'd have is it's not the pool per se, it's the management of the pool. So I think if we could have some guarantees that the New Zealand standard, water quality standard, will be adhered to or get very close to being adhered to, that would be fine. We've had those promises before from that same committee and the same committee members, though, which gives me doubts that would happen. Yeah.
James, the blunt question, I guess, is we're a committee of audit and risk, and what I'm hearing from you is that there is substantial risk to this organisation from the operation of that pool. Now, that risk falls upon us to monitor, but it falls upon you under the Health and Safety Act to wear the consequences of. So I guess I'm going to be really blunt here and ask the question that whether you are comfortable currently with the management of that pool being a risk that we could accept.
No.
And if I can just add to that, and I think James has rather eloquently stated that in the bottom of page 29, where he talks about 2 years of active attempts by council to improve health and safety and water quality has not resulted in improvements. And as a result, our risks are increasing.
Thank you, David. That's a point well made. And I think that's what we have to, as a committee, we have to take into account. Whether that can be proven going forward to change is ongoing discussions, perhaps, and that's between the aquatics manager and that committee to undertake and the future feasibility of the pool. But what we're discussing today is the actual risk of opening that pool again for the summer season under current operational criteria. So if there's no further questions, which there appears not to be, we've got two recommendations now, the amended B, that goes through for final approval by council, but also that we receive the update on the progress under A as well. So both A and B, if I can get a mover for that, Bob and Nicole, moved and second. Nothing further on that. All in favour? Against? Carried. Thank you, James. Thank you for your time and your report. Final report, page 132, Group Manager Environmental and Regulatory Services on the risk register. Tim, if you can come forward, page 132.
So I trust that you've all read the reports of this step through it. You will recall that council asked for a risk register to be updated in light of the pandemic. So council staff have done that, and there's a new part of the risk register that is dedicated to some of the risks that align with the pandemic COVID-19, and 14 emerging risks associated with that pandemic were identified and being included in that separate part of the risk register. So just in terms of the way we went about that, we asked Deloitte, who have an international presence around risk, and we drew upon their expertise just as a first cut to identify some of the more significant risks that might align with local government. And so I think that was a useful place to start from. It wasn't a particularly expensive process, but I think it was probably more efficient than council staff trying to go through the myriad of risks associated with the pandemic. So we came down to 14 risks, and there's five broad categories, which we'll touch on in a minute. But first of all, I just want to acknowledge that there are many, many different risks associated with COVID. It was particularly difficult to put them through some sort of lens to identify the most significant risks. And indeed, at the time of writing this, and even today, the risks are evolving over time. New risks will emerge. And just listening to James speak before, he spoke of a return to levels 2 and 3, which I think may not have, that is a specific risk that overlays the risks that we've got there. So again, there's many ways you can cut this particular pie. So but that is one thing that I think we probably need to factor in here, an updated version. The other part of this, because of the evolving situation, the risk register will need to be updated on a very regular basis. And I'd like some direction from this subcommittee about when they'd like to see that updated. I would, my suggestion would be that for the time being, that each meeting of this subcommittee, perhaps there is an inclusion of this risk register. There may not be a lot to talk about, but I think it would be a good overview for this committee to have the risk register, and particularly those risks around the pandemic, brought to them on a monthly basis. But I'll leave that for your direction, Mr. Chair and subcommittee members. So just moving to the 5 areas of risks that have been identified. The most obvious one is the financial risks, and there are very many different types of financial risks, but obviously the downturn in the local economy, the lack of migration into the district, the reduction in DCs and in fees poses a significant threat to council's revenue streams. And indeed, that is the issue that the full council will be looking at later on through the annual plan deliberations, and I guess into the years that come as well, in terms of the ongoing implications, economic implications of over COVID. And Infometrics have been supplying some information to you about some of those risks, so I think they're probably fairly well understood. But again, with that proviso, they're going to change over time and still developing. The other risk that I've included there under financial risks is the community expectation around a lower rates increase in light of the pressures on the local economy. And again, that is a threat to financials revenue that the council will be able to bring in through the rates. So that's financial risks, and we'll move through the register later on. You might be able to ask a specific question about the 14 risks that I've identified. The second broad group is around service delivery, and obviously there's a lot of pressure on council's ability to deliver on some of its services, and it'll create pressure on the council to provide new and modified services that have not been foreseen. And again, this is very much happening on a day-to-day basis, and there's issues around supply chains and the like that are still evolving today. And so there are some obvious risks around service delivery, and those risks I imagine will be updated on a monthly or weekly basis. The third category around there is around reputational risks that I've included, and this mainly is around the council's inability or perceived inability to respond to the community's expectations around service delivery, around lower rates, around levels of service. So there's some issues around there that obviously are quite significant. The fourth one, which is obviously, well, it is an obvious risk, it's around the health, safety and well-being, not only from the actual impact, the direct impact from COVID-19 on council staff and then hence on its operations, but again, I think on the different ways of working that that COVID have invoked have placed different pressures on council staff in terms of their well-being and the way they work at home. We have particular health and safety requirements, obviously, when we work in our offices, and how well they have migrated into the home work environment. It's still up in the air a wee bit. So stress, anxiety, all those issues around health, safety and well-being are significant and are worth keeping a close eye on. The other one that was of a bit more interest to me, and probably not quite as obvious to some, is the risks around fraud and cybersecurity that COVID has placed on some of our systems, and particularly our financial systems. And again, it's because of the new ways of working that COVID has brought about the council and other organisations, that there is opportunities and I guess gaps for some breakdown in terms of our processes and the way that we were able to identify and address financial errors and potential fraud, and there's a whole lot of cyber security issues. And I, for one, have seen a whole lot of spammy type things come across my email system that weren't there before. And I'm not an expert in this area, but it is something that we need to keep a close eye on. And if there's any questions around that, Greg might be in a better position to address those. So look, that's my report. If I could just now perhaps move to the register itself, and happy to take questions, not only on the COVID part of the risk register, but also the other part, the governance and operational parts of that risk register. So over to you, Mr. Chair.
We've got a number of questions there. I think Sam might have been first cab off the rank, so start with you, Sam.
Yeah, kia ora, Tim. Thank you for the report. Just looking at the growth risks which are identified in both the governance and COVID-19 space. A lot of the feedback from the community through this particular crisis has been that they've appreciated the open space that Selwyn affords them, and slightly larger section sizes compared to built up cities, and the current restrictions that we have under the regional policy statement around urban boundaries had a set of assumptions around the way that people wanted to live, and the transport that was required to move people places, and the type of urban form that's required to make those transport corridors function. I think there's significant risks to us around the ongoing growth as a council with those limits in place. And so and wondering how we would go about mitigating the risk, which is significant as you've have got there from a governance point of view, how we would go about lowering that risk to us, because that affects not only people's way of life living in Selwyn, but also council's finances, as you've identified in further risks.
Yeah, that's an interesting point and question, Sam. I guess my first comment would be that under the existing district plan framework and the proposed plan framework, while there are restrictions, on average the size of sections in Selwyn is considerably larger than they are in other parts of Greater Christchurch and Christchurch City in particular, and indeed I think Waimak, I think our sections are probably a bit larger, so we're probably got a bit of an advantage in that issue. I also, me and Sam, I have heard the same comments that we quite like being able to live in a large property or a lifestyle property, and you know, it has made it a bit easier under the pandemic experience. I guess there are issues around the regional policy statement, and again, that'll be part of the Greater Christchurch Partnership Review. We are stuck in that particular RMA framework, so I'm not sure there's any quick shortcuts, but I suppose that in terms of our discussions with the Greater Christchurch Partnership, that point needs to be made, and that there are some advantages to having some larger properties. I would say though, and a view has been put to me, that the pandemic, in terms of a 20-year type of outlook, can be seen as a bit of a blimp, and that just because we've had this experience doesn't mean we should throw away all of the advantages of a semi-consolidated urban environment. It does offer some advantages in terms of transport options. So I think we just have to keep that in mind as well, that there is a knee-jerk reaction to say we'll want 1,500 metre sections or what have you probably isn't warranted. But it is a fair point that some sort of variety in our section sizes, which we do provide for, is a good thing in many ways. And review of our rural residential provisions in our plan could offer some more options around that line. So I don't know if that really answers the questions. There's a whole policy range there, Sam. So
I guess, Mr. Chairman, for us as governance, we need to be just aware of where that RPS review is at, where the interim change is, and when the full review will be happening, and what understanding what council's position is leading into that, and also a capacity assessment which was done a couple of years ago now around provision of space within the Greater Christchurch area needs updating, and the hope was that that would be done in collaboration with the rest of the Greater Christchurch partners. And I hope that that can be done that way, but if not, we need to understand where we're at, Tim, so that we can make the right decisions for us as well.
Sam, just for clarification, it's a really good point, a good question. I wonder whether that's for us, whether as an audit, specifically for audit and risk to monitor, or whether it's something we need to be aware of as full council, so that we're advocating for the direction that our community sees, which obviously we do or will do. So are you suggesting we have a specific monitoring of that outcome, or are you thinking it's more a point that was raised rightfully as a risk to us, but our solution may not be around this table?
Good question, Mr. Chairman. I think probably because it's on the risk register in the first instance, if it was reported here, because then the risk reporting matches what the register has identified, and if it needs escalating and further reporting to council, so that everyone's aware. I think that's right.
We'll chalk that up. That might be the first good question of the day, maybe the last. So, so Tim, you note that there's a specific to come out of this.
yeah, and I could add some extra words to the risk register next time round, just to bring that point clearer to the table.
Thank you, Deborah.
Yes. With regards to employment risk and people working from home, I realise it's an HR, but apparently there's an app out there that some employers are using to be able to monitor through the use of a work computer if people are actually working at home and doing what they should be doing. Are you aware of that app, or is any investigation or looking at it a possibility of an app in the future if we have more people working from home?
Yeah, that's not an issue that I'm concerned about at all, Councillor Hassan. In terms of for instance, our building consent people work from the cloud, so it's very easy to see what they're doing through our Alpha software, and indeed all our resource consent stuff is based on not a cloud version, but it's easy to see what people have been doing. I think the working from home thing has brought a different, I guess, management style, and it's one based on trust, and that our staff on the whole do their work very well, be it in the office or at home. And a point that has been made to me time again, and it's quite a worthwhile point to think about, is that you can sit in your office and have someone working 20 feet away, or they can be sitting in New Brighton, perhaps. Same issue. You're not looking over the people's shoulders, checking on what they're doing. So you rely on other systems to make sure that work has been done. And I think part of the working from home situation would rely on clear communication, clear outcomes and expectations being set, with some goals that are monitored on a weekly basis as they are done in the office.
And just one question, with people working from home, how much of a saving have we actually made by them not working in this environment? For example, obviously they're using their own power, making their own coffee, etc. I know it sounds trivial, but what's the encountered savings over the organisation with regards to people working from home? Is it of value to us?
Look, I think it's through you, Mr. Chair, too early to assess the answer to that question, Councillor Hassan, but it is certainly one we're mindful of.
Well,
Yeah, under roles and responsibilities, will the community board be given a copy of this report? Thank you.
Councillor Reid, did you have a question? I see you've turned your mic off.
I was trying to find it, and I read it before when we were talking about the working from home and health and safety of how things are set up. But we also need to concentrate on the people's mental well-being, because being at home by yourself all the time for long periods does actually affect people as well, which we need to be conscious of. And that's something, and as Councillor Lemon has said, it's nice to be back for us back here and to be able to talk to each other, but it's also keeping in touch with the people who are working from home to make sure that they are still all right as well.
I think we're in danger of going into lower level detail rather than monitoring the risk register. So if we stick to the actual risks here rather than the dynamics of how we work as an organisation, I think that might be beneficial. Jeff.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chairman. And no, I'm not a member of this committee. I haven't skimmed through this document. I have seen something that perhaps we can look at. And I was thinking if perhaps page 140, and we're looking at role and responsibility. And I take what Tim has said, that lowering risk, you can only lower it, you cannot get rid of it. And the secret to risk management is to have in place mechanisms that will identify it. And one thing that I would say is that generally it's not upper management that identify the problems, it's lower management who then identify the problems and take it to upper management. And that has certainly been the case here at this organisation recently. So fraud is something that people will always be confronted with. If we go to role and responsibility, and I think this particularly is the most important part of this document. If I look at Chief Executive Officer, CEO, I see there is a mention there, develop, implement and maintain an effective management program through utilising the risk management team. And I don't see in the document the makeup of the risk management team, and I would have thought that this would have been perhaps a fairly important aspect of it. That's one question. If you go to executive leadership, we also see, and that's the upper management, I see utilise the risk management team to regularly review. I think you really do need to identify a risk management team, but I do think that that risk management team should have people from throughout the organisation, not just the upper management, because as I said, it's generally the people at the lower echelons that identify the problems that occur. And the other thing is that it's generally a whistleblower that will pick up the major problems in any organisation. And one of the things that I've spoken about in the past, and I'm really pleased to see now, that we do have an independent member of the audit and risk team. And I would have thought that that independent person would have been on this risk register so that he, and quite clearly made out that he or she, whoever that person may be, is a person that anyone in this organisation can go to because they're independent and outline any problems that have manifested in whatever level that they work. So I do think that you've missed quite an opportunity if you don't put that in and identify that the independent member of audit and risk is a person that anyone in this organisation can go to and outline any problems that they've seen. And the other thing, if we go to Audit and Risk Committee on this particular page, and it says, assist the council to discharge its responsibility. This is the Audit and Risk team, this committee. Assist the council to discharge its responsibilities by making recommendations to the council and or management. And I don't think that the Audit and Risk Committee have that authority to be going directly to management. The Audit and Risk team itself reports to council. So I can see real problems here if the Audit and Risk team or members of the Audit and Risk team perceive that there's a problem, then go directly perhaps to the CEO or Tim or anyone else in this organisation. Any problems that are manifest themselves through this committee must be reported to council. The Audit and Risk team is a leg of council, and it shouldn't be reporting directly to management. Management being the CEO, who is the only person that we can report to in any case. So I think that needs to be changed. Just a couple of little points, but I think that I would have brought them up at a council meeting. It's probably better if you think that they need to be changed, that they change at this level.
Just a couple of observations with respect to those comments. I think the first one is just reminding ourselves that we haven't actually got that independent member yet. So when that person comes on, that will require a review of the role and responsibility, not only of the committee, but the individuals within that committee. I think the other thing, Councillor Bland, that we may well consider is linking the risk register to the code of conduct as well. I think quite appropriate lines of connection there.
Thank you, David. I take your point, Councillor Bland, with interaction between this committee and directly with management. I expect that we would operate in a similar position that we do as full council, and that we have access to staff, and we wouldn't abuse that process in any form. So that's a point well made. Tim, you may have some comments around inclusion. Perhaps it's not necessarily going to be names of people on that. It will be positions of people, members, because obviously those names change as we lose significant people. So perhaps have you got any comment, Tim, you'd like to make?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Councillor Bland, for pointing those things out. The risk management team, you're quite right, doesn't formally exist. It's probably the ELT team that forms that team. So in terms of the process, I have developed the risk register, and I rely on the ELT members on a monthly basis to update that. I presume after getting feedback from their staff and other issues that they're aware of. There isn't a formal risk management team. This policy framework does suggest that there is. So I think it would be appropriate to include a series of names or positions, that might form that team. I guess this speaks to probably, and if I can say this, the risk management approach has been largely led by me by default in many ways. There isn't a strong, I guess, risk management focus on the council really, and this is a developing framework, but it's a good point, Councillor Bland, and one that I'll follow up and have a discussion with the CEO around, so you might have a bit of an updated on the risk management team at the next meeting. Thank you.
It's just a reminder too of the process, how we arrived with this report. It was something that came to the previous triennium's Audit and Risk Committee for inclusion. I think it came through the audit process, if I remember correctly, Tim, that it was a hole we had in our operations. And credit to you for setting this up and getting us to the point we are. It is, as everything is around council table, an evolving process. So this was adopted by previous triennium's Audit and Risk Committee and would have gone through the full council for ratification. So it is as ratified by full council. So it's just a reminder to all members that that's how the process works. But obviously, as the risks alter, then maybe the makeup and the nature of how we assess those risks and who assesses those risks may be subject to change as well. And as Councillor Bland has said, the inclusion of the independent member may be extremely useful. So that's something we'll take on board. So thank you, Councillor Bland.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Kia ora, Tim. Thank you very much for your report. I support your point about visiting the risk register once a month, and commend you on adding reputational risk to the risk register, and wanted to know whether it's under governance or operational, and if you could take us through your points through the steps in mitigation and response mitigation timeframe. I haven't got it on my report here unless everybody has, but
just for clarification, which are you talking about a particular risk area, or
I've added reputational risk to the risk.
Can you just
if you could take us through
the operational area with governance area?
Both. So I just wanted to know if you could take us through your risk assessment on each category, especially response and mitigation under reputational risk.
Okay, I'm just scrolling down here.
Thank you.
If you could point me to a particular number would be useful.
No, I haven't. I got it on my risk register at all. I thought it was an addition to.
I think what Councillor Parr is referring to is at page 133, where reputational risk is mentioned under point 3. Shane?
Oh, thank you.
That's also on page 149.
Right. Thank you. I'll take it as read.
Just time to get through to that, Tim. Have a quick read before you answer. So specifically, Shani, you're wanting an
got it here now.
understanding of where that, what Tim would look at as far as reputational risk is and how he'd report that back?
Yes.
I guess my, sorry, if I think I understand your question, please tell me if I'm on the wrong track. So those broad categories were a summary of the various areas that the risk register in terms of the COVID-19 risk register identified. They're not specifically reputational risks, but they drop out of a number of the individual risks around for service delivery. For instance, if we can't produce the right services, then council's reputation may be at risk. Similarly, if we don't respond appropriately to the demands of the community in respect of rates, then that again is a effect of that risk being manifested. So I don't know if it's, so when I've got those four broad categories up there, they're a summary of a number of the different risks that I've identified, the 14 risks that I've identified in the COVID risk register. So in terms of the methodology, that's set out in the policy above, and basically it's just identifying, and again, it's got a degree of subjectivity around it. So it's identifying what the sort of the consequence of the risk might be, then looking at a factor of how likely it is to happen. Then you reach an overall score, and that score itself then is broken down into, I think, 5 different levels: catastrophic, significant, moderate, and the last 2 I can't remember, possible and rare, I think, were the last 2. So it's a common sort of risk analysis methodology. It's a fairly blunt instrument, but it's one that I guess, because all of this involves a bit of judgment, but you don't know what's going to happen before it's happened, sort of thing. So it's just a matter of trying to get a feel for, if something did happen, if there was a death of an individual employee because it followed the correct procedures around COVID-19, that would be catastrophic. What's its likelihood? Well, probably not that great given the current lack of community COVID-19. So therefore you put those 2 together and you might come up with a moderate score rather than a catastrophic score. I don't know, is that sort of answered some of your question? But look, again, if you would like to sit down with me and say, I think this should be different, or add this in, quite happy to have your comments. It was particularly difficult. It seems easy. What are the risks with COVID? When you actually sit down and try and get them into 14 major risks, it was particularly challenging. And particularly working with other parts of the council who's a perspective that, well, for my operation, this happens, it's a huge risk. And then there's competing risks across the council, and trying to prioritise those are particularly challenging. But look, as I say, it's a work in progress. Quite happy to have input from anyone in terms of addressing some gaps if they're there.
Aroha mai, Tim. Thank you.
Thanks, Tim. I think reputational risk is one of those, it's very difficult to define, of course, and it's very difficult to measure, I guess, is the other thing as well. So it's, as you say, an inclusion of something that will evolve over time. So encourage councillors to have those conversations with Tim and help refine those definitions. And you've given some examples there of, cases where perhaps we've had reputational risk in the past. So I guess following on from that, Tim, is trying to determine what that level is. Have you had any thoughts about, and this goes for anything, how you do your assessment of levels? You've got the significant, as possibility an overall score of 8. So just perhaps quickly, for the benefit of those around the table, how you arrived at those scores. I don't want to spend too much time on it, obviously, because we've talked about this before.
Yeah, again, it's just a process of trying to understand the likelihood of something to happen, and sort of call out. So high risk with very high likelihood, obviously more risk than something that be catastrophic and it's highly likely. So if we had a high rate of infection here in the council, would have a
Thank you, David. Did you have something you want to add?
Yeah, do a couple of things, and I think just adding to what Tim's final comments are, of course, this is subject to regular review. There's a lot of fluidity attached to these, particularly when you have a look at the matrix on page 154 of the report, where we talk about the impacts under COVID-19 and how they will either accelerate or diminish over a period of time. But, you know, reputational risk, it's probably an all-day discussion, but it's probably 5 key things for me around reputational risk, coming back to your question, Shane. Starting at the very pointy end is obviously our credit rating, which is the highest in the country. So it's a matter of maintaining that or impact against that, our ability to make sure our service is delivered in accordance with the expectation of the community, and how we manage that through community engagement levels. And I guess leadership and comments about leadership. We measure a lot of it through our annual community survey, which will be undertaken fairly shortly. And then, you know, the bluntest instrument of all is the ballot box every 3 years, just in terms of where that reputation is, not only council, but individual members.
Thank you, David. There being no more questions, the first one we need to establish, I guess, before we go to vote for receiving the report is whether we want this to be monthly in the interim under COVID. We'll just quickly go around the room. Sam?
Yeah.
Nicole? Bob? Yeah. Shane?
Yes.
Deborah? Yeah. I just wonder, Tim, whether we need to have the full depth of report monthly, whether we stick with the bi-monthly report and just highlight the changes specifically around COVID on a monthly basis. Does that meet with your ability?
Yeah, that's fine. And Mr. Chair, if I may, through you, if there's any suggestions about other risks that you'd like to see included in there, or want to come down and have a discussion with me or send me an email, I'd only welcome that. So, thank you.
Thank you, Tim. Good report again, and well appreciated. So with that clarification that it moves forward monthly under that parameter, can I have someone move that the subcommittee receives the report, the risk register for its information? Sam and Nicole. Moved and seconded. No further discussion. All in favour? Against? Carried. That brings us to the end of the public part of the meeting. So if I can get someone to move us into public excluded, Sam and Shane. Thank you. All in favour? Against? Carried. We'll have a recess for